You may be seated. The court is now back in session. Once again, the floor is given to the assigned lawyer for civil party to put questions to the civil party. However, you are reminded that the questions shall be brief and precise. And also, Mr. Civil Party, please listen to the questions carefully and limit your response to the question only. And please do not make any additional comments further from what is being asked of you. Thank you. The floor is now given to the assigned lawyer for civil parties.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Pinyatai, I will ask a few questions regarding your long journey, which you spoke about. You talked about your life during the Khmer Rouge period in your book. You said you arrived in Chek Mau. For 10 days, you had been going across different regions from Phnom Penh to that region in Chek Mau. You were deprived of your papers, you were deprived of your vehicles, and you arrived in that village. My first question is as follows. Who were the leaders of that village?
Response. At Chek Mau, only the Khmer Rouge cadres who were in the leadership of that village.
Vous a-t-on les personnes qui avaient été déportées de Phnom Penh?
Regarding the persons who were deported from Phnom Penh, and I understand that you are not the only one who left Phnom Penh, were all those persons who had left Phnom Penh on the 17th of April rallied together? And if so, what did they tell you?
As I indicated earlier, thousands of people left Phnom Penh city, and along the road and through our journey we came across many villages. They were mainly empty. And when we reached the first village in the liberated zone, and we knew it was a liberated zone because people were living in that village, and they were known as the best people, and most of them dressed in black. In that first village in the liberated zone, that village was located in Prek Toi. So we were there on the 10th day of our journey, and during the previous days, the villages were empty. Only in Prek Toi, people were living in the village. And at night, some people would seek refuge in those houses, and we knew it was the liberated zone. And people there did not go anywhere because they were the best people. And that's how we knew it.
À la question, à Chek Mau, effectivement, il y avait des villageois, vous dites le peuple ancien. Ma question était, vous, qui ne faisiez pas partie de ce peuple ancien. D'ailleurs, est-ce qu'il y avait une appellation particulière vous concernant? Qu'est-ce que les dirigeants Khmer rouges de ce village ont fait? Vous ont-ils réunis, pas réunis, expliqué ce que vous veniez faire, ce que vous alliez faire dans ce village? Quel était l'objectif de cet accueil dans ce village?
What was your You were assembled in that village. What was the objective of your deportation to that village? They brought you to that village and you were not a member of that village community. You were that village community was referred to as the old people. Why did they deport you to that village? Did they explain to you why?
President, Madam Civil Party Lawyer, please repeat your last question since there was no English translation. Thank you.
Oui.
Yes. I was asking Mr. Pinatai whether upon their arrival in the village, in which the inhabitants were referred to as the old people, my question was whether the deported persons were referred to by a particular name and how the integration of the people who had just arrived was organized in that village by the Khmer Rouge.
Response. As I said earlier, when we left Phnom Penh, we reached the first village where people resided. That was in the liberated zone in Prek Toi. And then in Prek Thom, people were living there because it was the liberated zone. And when we were in Prek Mau, people were also referred to as by people or old people because they lived in the liberated zone. But we knew ourselves that those people who lived in Chư Khmer, they had their own houses and they remained in their houses. And for us, the new people, were greeted and we were given a decent meal with food, rice and soup. That is after the initial checking of our names. And we were asked to stay overnight at the Chư Khmer Pagoda since we arrived in late afternoon. And next day we were asked to live in a house and immediately we were called for a meeting. Then in the meeting, they said that you comrades from Phnom Penh, you did not receive the education yet, and that you used to work in the old regime, and Angka did not mind about that. But please try to focus on your education and try to engage in the revolutionary work, and then you would be taken care of by Angka. And then they continued their explanation that we were now in the new regime. And they did not say that we were new people, but we ourselves knew that we were new people. because we came from afar, that is from Phnom Penh. And in the first political meeting, they explained to us that we were not yet educated and that we had connection with our regime, but we would not be mistreated by that, and that we had to refashion ourselves in conformity with the revolution. For example, a gentleman with a long hair had to cut his hair.
Thank you. What work did you have to do to refashion yourselves? Did you work with the old people or on your own? And how was your community in Chukmau organized?
On the second day, when we were called, we were given a house to live in. Actually, we were asked to live with the best people at their respective houses. For larger families like us, then we were asked to live in a larger house. But as in the case of my family, because we had a lot of family members, then we were asked to live in a monk residence, which was pretty large in that pagoda. So we kind of restricted in terms of freedom, and we did not want to do anything wrong. So we were kind of fortunate as we lived separately in a monk's residence. And next day after, we were woken by a loudspeakers to commence our work, and we worked in separate groups. Men worked in men's group, women worked in women's group, and children worked in women's group, in children's group. And we did not mix with the best people. Only those cadres, they monitored us. They were with us, they monitored the progress of our work. But they worked more actively than us because they had experience in that.
After the 3 months in the village, you received an offer to go back to your native village. You had already been promised that you would be able to go back to Phnom Penh after 3 days, but you picked up immediately on this new proposal straight away. Why? Weren't you a little suspicious?
The expectation to return to Phnom Penh was over because we knew that the 3-day period was no longer realized, as we were in Chukmau for 10 days. And it was our hope that we had to risk for a better living condition. For that reason, we volunteered to leave Chukmau. And of course, we had at least 80% expectation that we would be returned to our native village.
In fact, as you told us just now, you didn't go back to your native village. And after a fairly easy phase,
លោកក៏បាន
you you ended up, once again, in a very difficult predicament in the Takao region, if I am correct on this. Did anybody explain to you why you were sent to Takao, and how did all of that function? Was the organization in Takao different to the way things were done in Chukmao? And did you understand the deception that was going on in the minds of those in charge of you?
We lived for 3 months in Chukmao village, and when we were asked to go to our native village, along the journey we stopped at Sramo Liu in Takao province. The Khmer Rouge cadre came to meet us and said that they knew that we were heading toward our native village, but they reminded us that the month was the transplanting month, and we were asked to stay there for a while, and that we would engage in farming for a while. That's what they said, and they did not tell us how many months that we had to stay there before we were allowed to go to our native village. The difference between that place and Chukmao village was that at Chukmao the majority of us were allowed to live together with the base people, but at Sramo Liu it was different. Old people did not allow the new people to live with them. So we were asked what we did during the previous regime, and then we were put into that groups. For example, public servants would be allowed to group with the public servants, and the soldiers were allowed to live with the soldiers group, and the business people were allowed to put into that group. As for us, we were allowed to live in amongst residents, and we belonged to the public servants group. And the work was similar in nature, but the types of work we were assigned was different. We farmed, but there was inadequate water. We were asked to build the dam as well. The work fashion was rather similar, but the type of work was different. It could be due to the geographical differences.
Can you tell us about the children and the sick in the village? You had children who should have been of school age. Was there any kind of school for the children? Was there any kind of care proposed for the sick?
Neither at the new village or Chukmao village was there an education for children. For example, my eldest son, who was 9 years old at the time, was assigned to work in the children's group. There was no medical assistance or hospital. For example, everyone had to rely on whatever we had. If we had a headache, for instance, we had to find if we had a pill for that. Onka did not provide us with medical assistance. The only thing they did was to distribute rice ration. The second, to assign us work. And the third was political education. We had to attend a meeting, a livelihood meeting every 3 to 4 days. It was a kind of criticism or self-criticism meeting. Then gradually they would educate us about the new society and the task that we had to engage ourselves in. That political session started or commenced every 3 days, and once in a while a major meeting was convened. In Chư Khmer, no such situation existed. In Chư Khmer, for instance, thousands of people were gathered to build a dam. And people in my village were responsible for a 500-meter segment of the dam. And at the conclusion of building, or at the completion of the dam, senior people, it could be from provincial level or from the upper level, held a meeting.
Since you're talking about senior people, in the first phase of your deportation, did you meet high-ranking people or did you recognize any senior people?
Do you referring to senior people from the Khmer Rouge side or from the former Republican regime?
No,
No, Khmer Rouge.
Senior people from the Khmer Rouge side, I did not meet them in person. I saw them from a distance. For example, when we were resting at the law faculty, I saw them in a convoy of vehicles traveling toward Phnom Penh city. And the second time was at Sromo Liu. I happened to see them as I had a former colleague by the name of Chan. His wife was from Badambong, but he had his parents living in Sromo Liu. Because he was a new person, he was not allowed to live with his parents, so he lived nearby where I lived. And occasionally when we worked at the work site, during the lunch break, he would go and visit his parents, and sometimes I went along. And one day I met a Khmer Rouge who was the in-law of that comrade Chan. And that Khmer Rouge cadre was about 35 years old, but he had a motorbike. And he had 2 pence in his pocket. That was the Khmer Rouge cadre that I met, and I knew that he worked at the provincial level at the time.
Mr. Pinatai, I will continue with my questions. After the slightly harder phase, by comparison to the previous one, it was suggested that you go to Batambong. That seemed like El Dorado, paradise, and you accepted to go there. My colleague, when he was asking you questions, elicited the response from you that the journey was a very difficult one. You talked to us about hundreds, even thousands of people on arrival and on the roads. You saw people who were walking by the road or in ox carts or in trucks. Can you describe the predicament of these people and of your family for that matter? These people who were going from Dachau to the Pursat region over the space of 2 weeks, if I am correct.
For the 15-day period, in fact, we came to rest at Angroka Pagoda to wait for the tracks to pick us up. And in fact, for the journey, we stopped overnight after we passed through Kampong Chnang. As I said earlier, for the first evacuation, the condition was better, but for the second evacuation, we were packed into a truck and there was no covered roof. And in fact, on the truck that I traveled, 2 people fainted and subsequently died. It was difficult. And of course, at that time, our expectation degraded. And I observed that starting from September 1975, which was the second phase of evacuation, was a critical period. And by then, we realized that ANCA had a preconceived plan for Cambodian people, in particular for the new people. Of course, I can talk further on my analysis on this point if you wish me to do so.
Well, your analysis is certainly of great interest to us, Mr. Pinyatai, but I would like to ask you 1 or 2 specific questions at this stage on the region that you arrived in, the jungle area, which you, in one of your books, called the jungle of death. Can you tell us, please, about the organization of labor there? Everybody's daily work. Tell us about that.
Regarding the work assignment for people was similar to the one that was done at the previous location. However, the work was harder as we had to clear the forest for farming. So it was rather hard compared to building the dam at the Sramo Liu. In the first location, we stayed with the base people at their existing houses or at the monks' residences. But in the forest, we had to build a shelter by ourselves. And of course, I did not have the expertise in that, and we did not have the tools to do so. So we had to try our best to make a temporary shelter that we could probably live for a week, but if we were to live for 5 to 6 months, then it would not be an ideal shelter. And the work was rather harder, and we were monitored by soldiers with guns. At that time, the soldiers did not do the work with us, but they stood guard, watching us work. And of course, the meetings were in a similar nature. The ration distribution is the same, and of course, there was no school.
Thank you. Was the discipline very severe? And did you witness arrests or disappearances in the course of the period in the jungle, either in that first phase in Velvong, because you were moved from Velvong to Danai and then to a third place, but it was roughly speaking the same region. So could you explain to us how life was at that stage?
Would you like me to talk about the situation at Wil Vung or at the second and third locations?
Je vous posais la question.
My question really was asking you if during this second evacuation phase, when you were moved into the forest and where you were shifted from one place to another, can you tell us, generally speaking, during that whole period until your final decision to run away from the region and from Cambodia itself, did you feel that there was strong repression, there were arrests, there were disappearances and so forth? And for that matter, were you yourself the subject of violence?
Allow me to respond by focusing on main events, because there were many events that happened during the time. In Wil Vung, there were two events that I'd like to touch upon. At that time, for those people who did not have rice to eat because they did not have anything to barter, and the rice ration was reduced from 2 people to 6 people per can, one day Angka did not distribute the rice ration. They missed it for 2 days. Then there was a strike, and there were about 150 to 200 people joining the strike. And as I said, in that camp there were about 5,000 people, so 200 people was a small amount. So they protested and asked for the reason why rice ration was not distributed. That was the first time that they dared to ask the Khmer rules. At that time, the village chief came to tell them that, "Comrades, you had been educated for months. Why you still conform to the old regime's fashion? And of course, only for 2 days that you did not have a rice ration, you protested. That was not the nature of a revolutionary, and that you destroyed the order. You destroyed the order of the people in Wil Vung." And then they asked the protesters to be patient and that the rice would be arrived in a few days' time. And as it turned out, in a few days' time, the rice arrived. And later on, I observed that 4 or 5 people who led the protest, and they were teachers. And as I said earlier, my younger brother was also a teacher, but I asked him not to involve in the protest. And later, my younger brother told me that the 4 or 5 teachers disappeared 1 or 2 weeks later. But of course, we had no evidence to say whether those teachers had been arrested or they fled. And we asked the village chief about them, and the village chief said he knew nothing about them. And the second event that I'd like to say was about the rumors I heard since we were at the Ong Roka Pagoda. We heard about rumors from those people who came from various zones. The rumor was that Prince Sihanouk would return to Cambodia, and that he would not return alone, but he would return with one condition. And the condition that he would impose was that for the Khmer rules to agree to that condition before he would return to the country. And that rumor spread to Wil Vung when I was there as well. So one day, during the meeting, the village chief actually said that Prince Sihanouk would return soon and form a new government for the rebuilding of the country, and that Angkar would require technicians, expert people in the field of engineering or in medicine, or those people engaged in the postgraduate studies or senior military officers, that they should register themselves so that they could go and work for the new government. And there were about 40 people who raised their hand to volunteer to go. And a few days later, the 40 were tracked to Phnom Penh. But of course, we did not know where they were taken to, as their families were awaiting their news. And then there was rumor that they were smashed by Angkar. But of course, we did not have any evidence to say so. It was only a rumor. And so I continue from Wil Vung to the next village, because based on your question, it linked to another location where I stay, and that was at the end of December. At that time, there was a Khmer Rouge who was from another location who came to convene a meeting and asked if any of us would want to go to another location. At that time, we, my family members, raised our hand, and we wanted to move to another location, although it was still within the northwest zone. About 1/3 of the 5,000 people volunteered to go to the new village. So there were about 1,000 of us. It was called Phum Prampi, or Prampi village. It was located near the river. And then I was moved to Don Day village. There were about 7 villages there. And that happened in January 1976. It was coincidental with the time of the announcement of the institution.
Période.
Thank you, Mr. Pignatay. Let us leave it at that on that period. Now, I would like to ask you, because you talked about your son Sudat, who was aged 11. In that third evacuation stage, was he obliged to work? And what happened to him in the end?
Response. At Don A village, I also wish to add, although I am not asked, after the declaration of the Constitution, we were asked to have communal eating. That means we did not need to have our private belongings, pots and pans, as we did, because at Sramolia we would eat privately, but now we were asked to eat communally. So without pots and pans, it was for sure that if we offered some rice, then we would not have any pots to cook the rice, so we had to eat communally. The situation was so difficult. The food ration became so little and less. At the beginning, the few days or the few weeks when we were made to eat communally, we had plenty of food to eat. We were so happy because we knew that we no longer had problem with foods. But that proved to be wrong later on. We didn't have enough.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pignate, I do have to restrain you here because time is passing and the prosecutors have questions to put to you as well. If you wish, please answer the question about your son and then I will ask you one more question.
Response. I apologize as well because I overstepped this boundary, but indeed the situation was relevant to why my son died. At that time, he was about 10 years old. He had to work. Every child who was 9 years or above had to work. And at that time, he was so hungry. We had nothing left to barter with other people for food, and he had to hunt for food. But because he had leg injury, I asked him to keep home because to keep him at home. And later on, the Khmer Rouge came to our home and learned that he was at home. We were reprimanded for keeping this kid at home. We were reprimanded for keeping him, and they said that the kid belonged to, or the son belonged to Angkar, not belonging to us. And I told them that our son had leg injury and he could not walk to work. And they said, look, if he couldn't walk to work, how could he go in hiding? And the following day, indeed, they brought our son to work. And we were told the following days that he collapsed and died at work.
Une dernière question.
I have just one last question, and it is a general question. You experienced terrible events. The Khmer Rouge deceived you throughout your journey. What did you understand as far as the objectives of the Khmer Rouge were regarding the deportation of the new people?
Response. I thank you very much for this question. I have analyzed the objective of the Khmer Rouge. I did that because I need to live with some hope. At Chơ Khmer, as an engineer, I was well educated. I was taught critical thinking. And I was able to judge the situation concerning socialism. I also could see that no country in the world would reject having all the technicians, engineers, and every educated person to help rebuild the country. But my hope was somehow fading when days passed by. answering to your question, what the Khmer Rouge wanted, and after the regime, I had some ample time to rethink about the objective of the Khmer Rouge. During the first phase of the evacuation, my whole family survived. 18 of us could still live. However, during the first phase, we could also ask the question, what UNCTAD did to us? It is a transition when the old regime was destroyed. We were deprived of our private ownership, no money circulation, no property. And we also were deprived of the bartering services, no enterprises, no judicial systems, no school. So this was part of the objective to rid of the former regime they believed to be the feudalist and the imperialist regime. And they did their best to rid of materialism, human resources, and everything. At that time, we survived, but physically we survived, mentally we dead. And it was the part of the Khmer Rouge plan to rebuild a country where there was no oppressors and no the oppressed people. And they installed the weak. They promoted them literally, but in reality, the weak died because they were sent to the place where living condition was so difficult. And at the same time, they also try to control people whose stance was not certain. And in part of the journeys, I told you, we wanted to go to Battambang. They made us go to Posat instead.
Si vous avez encore quelque chose à dire, je pense que vous pourriez parler pendant des heures, mais ce n'est pas le lieu. Donc, si vous avez terminé votre appréciation des objectifs qu'avaient les Khmers rouges face au peuple nouveau, je céderai la parole au coprocureur.
Mr. Pinyatai, you have a lot to say. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time. If you have completed your testimony, please, I'll give the floor to the prosecutor.
The President, it appeared to us that there was no interpretation in the English channel. Court officer is now instructed to assist with people concerned to make sure that we hear interpreting. I have been informed that things get back on track. Then we would like to conclude the session by the lead co-lawyers for the civil party when putting question to the civil party. We would like to hand over now to the prosecution, please.
Mr. President, Your Honours, may it please you. Mr. Pinyatai, there is a clock on the wall over there. It is 20 minutes before 12 o'clock. Unless the judges agree to an extension of time, I have 20 minutes to ask you relevant questions. If you answer my questions at the length that you have already answered questions, you and I will not cover the topics that I want to cover with you. Can I please, therefore, ask you to listen to every single question I put to you and give the briefest possible answer that you can to every single question. Can we proceed in that fashion? Yes or no?
Response: Yes, I'll do my best.
Thank you very much. You've written a book called Stay Alive, My Son. The reference in the court file to that book is D22/3649B. I am going to read extracts from that book to you and ask you, yes or no, whether you agree with the extract. The first extract deals with the evacuation of Phnom Penh on the 17th of April 1975. It's dealt with on English ERN 00587-559, Khmer 00588-135, French 00587-830. You're talking about the day and looking around, and this is what you said in the book. There were even some doctors and nurses still dressed in white. No one, it seemed, had escaped the roundup. One young man was carrying his sick father on his back. Women carried babies on their hips. The lame limped on crutches. Twice I saw patients in wheeled hospital beds being pushed along by relatives. Is that right, yes or no?
Response: Yes.
Thank you. At English page 00587-560, Khmer 0058836 going to 37, and French 00587-831 through 32. You talk about hearing gunshots, and you said this, still on the 17th of April. I quote, "We had covered no more than half a mile when I heard a gunshot. Up the street lay the body of a young man. He was about 18. Some 15 yards away from him, a soldier stood, smoke still wafting lazily upwards from his AK-47. Everyone around asked each other what had happened. Within a minute, word reached us that the boy had forgotten something in his house. He had turned back in defiance of the soldier's order and was about to re-enter his house when the soldier shot him. The soldier had exclaimed, 'This is what happens to recalcitrants.' Is that right, yes or no?"
Response: Yes, it is.
Thank you. You talked about seeing bodies. English ERN 00587-568. Khmer 00588-146. French 00587-841. And I quote, "The further we travelled from the capital, the more exhaustion claimed the sick, the injured, the lame, and the old. Increasingly, we began to see bodies left beside the highway until we were no longer shocked by the sight. Is that correct, yes or no?"
Response. Yes, it is.
Dealing with the structure at Chuk Mao, you said this: English ERN 005875884, Khmer 005881167, French 005-87859 through to 60. I quote, "The few Khmer Rouge officers watched over all our activities. A chairman, a vice chairman, and a secretary commanded assistants in charge of education, discipline, and health. The Khmer Rouge were informed about our doings by an official informer." Is that correct? Yes or no?
Response. Yes, it is.
Thank you. Dealing with deaths at Chuk Mao, and you arrived in Chuk Mao in late April 1975. You said this: English ERN 005875885, Khmer 005881167 through 68, French 005-87860. I quote, "There were, of course, numerous deaths. The dead were buried with the briefest of ceremonies. Husbands and wives were allowed to take time off for mourning, but they no longer had the help of monks. Is that correct? Yes or no?"
Response. Yes, it is. That happened at Chuk Mao.
You moved from Chuk Mao to Sramao Leo in July 1975. So I'm now talking after July 1975 at Sramao Leo. You met a Khmer Rouge officer called Mit Pech, English IRN 00587601, Khmer 005888188, French 005-87879. And you said, so at this period there, Chan introduced me to the Khmer Rouge officer Mit Pech. Pech was a highly placed man in the provincial communist hierarchy. I move on before I start asking the question. 2. English 005-87602, Khmer 005-88199, French 005-87879 through 80. And you're talking now about a question that you asked Mit Pech about Khmer Rouge policy. His response, quoting from your book, is as follows. I quote, "You know, undoubtedly, that Vietnam is not totally revolutionary. It did not order the evacuation of the cities, as we did. We know that it is dangerous to leave the cities intact, inhabited. They are the centres of opposition and contain little groups. In a city, it is difficult to track down the seeds of counter-revolution. If we do not change city life, an enemy organisation can be established and conspire against us." It is truly impossible to control a city. We evacuated the city to destroy any resistance, to destroy the cradles of reactionary and mercantile capitalism. To expel the city people meant eliminating the germs of anti-Khmer Rouge resistance. This is but one of the aspects of our dissension with the Vietnamese. Is that correct? Yes or no?
The President, Civil Party, please hold on counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. I've been listening to a whole line of questioning about several excerpts from the book written by the witness, and every excerpt is followed by a question, is it correct, yes or no? I presume that these questions imply answering from the witness saying that he actually wrote it in his book, not necessarily that it is actually true in the sense that it happened. I see my learned friend nod, so I presume that I'm right.
Yes, that's correct. Can I move on, please? I'm dealing now with Vale Vong. You moved from Sraup Mau Leo to Vale Vong in September 1975. And you wrote this in your book, and it reflects your view. I'm on English page 00587-610, and the French is 0058-7891. I can see I've neglected to put the Khmer ERN, but this is what you said in the book. I quote, "In saying we wanted to leave Chuk Mao to go to our native villages, we had been tricked into identifying ourselves as those with individualist leanings. We had in effect denounced ourselves. This third deportation was nothing more than another step in our destruction as new people." Is it correct that that's what you wrote in the book, yes or no?
Response, yes.
In describing the conditions at Vale Vong in the jungle, English ERN 00587-619, Khmer 00588-220 through 21, French 00587-899-90. You said, I quote, "The pattern was much the same as before. Wake up at 6 a.m, a break for food between noon and 1 p.m, work until 6 p.m. However, for the first time, we were supervised by armed guards during our working hours. Is that what you recall happening in Vale Vong, yes or no?"
Response, yes.
Dealing with the numbers of people, you've already said 5,000 people, but you added this, same page reference. I quote, "Nor was the great exodus over yet. For several weeks after our arrival, thousands and thousands more, all city people in their tattered city clothes, all as distressed as we had been, filed past our hut, plunging deeper into the forest to make new fields as we were doing. Is that a correct recollection from this time, yes or no?
Response, yes.
Dealing with another question about Viet Vong, and I remind that you said that you arrived in Viet Vong in September 1975 after the trip on the trucks. In respect of people dying, you said as follows, and if I can quote the ERNs, English 00587620, Khmer 005882222, French 0058790 into 91. I quote, "It was not long before the dying started. Even in the first week, I saw several people carrying corpses down the trail. It was hardly surprising, given the amount of people in the forest near us and their state of health. The dead were buried in the forest, at the edge of our newly cut fields." Is that your recollection of what happened with the dead, starting 1 week after you arrived at Viet Vong? Yes or no?
Response, yes.
Still on Viet Vong and still on dying, English 00587623, Khmer 005882226 through 27, French 0058790. I quote, "Now, death came with increasing frequency in the forest around us. The bodies were buried all around the edge of the clearings by grave diggers appointed by the village chief. Grave diggers became necessary because the families had become too weak to dig the graves themselves. It was not a bad job, for it meant being exempted from work for a day. There was no relief from the unrelenting labour. Time was measured now by the number of deaths per day in the people around us. 4 deaths, 5 deaths, sometimes as many as 10 deaths a day. Is that a correct recollection of death in the forest? Yes or no?"
Response, yes.
Still at Viet Vong, the subject is disappearances. English ERN 0058726, Khmer 005882230 through 31, French 0058790 through 08. You said this, I quote, "Then I began to notice the disappearances. The first one I noticed was Ming, a Vietnamese neighbour. Then I noticed that a number of former Republican officers who had tried to conceal their identity had vanished. A couple of times a worried wife asked me, 'Have you seen my husband? He went off to cut bamboo, and I haven't seen him for 2 days.' I thought perhaps they had escaped. Is that an accurate record of your recollections as to disappearances, yes or no?
Response: yes.
Dealing with how many people had died, you have already stated in your evidence that 1/3 of 5,000 approximately people died. But to put some timings on this, as I said, you arrived in Viêl Vong in September 1975, and you left Viêl Vong at the end of December 1975. In respect to the time period, you said this: English ERN 00587 638, Khmer 005 88246, French 0058 7922. I quote: by the end of November, 1/3 of the population of Viêl Vong had died. And you mention atrocious conditions. Is that right as to your recollection as to the number that had died, and this was by the end of November? Yes or no?
Response: yes, that was my analysis.
You moved to Chamkar Trasak on the Passat River, arriving in January 1976. English ERN 00587 657, Khmer 005 88268, and French 005 87943. You mentioned that there was diarrhea, dysentery, fevers, malaria, and edema. And you then said this, I quote: day by day, conditions worsened. The rice soup became more watery. Since we ate communally, we were no longer allowed to have rice at home. Is that correct, yes or no?
Response: yes.
One final question. You set out in your application in this case the numbers of your family who died or went missing during this period. I can't put my hand on the document, but can you summarise, please, in terms of members of your family, how many died or went missing? Just their names and their relationship to you, please.
Response: at Viêl Vong, 4 people, 2 died, 2 disappeared. My cousin, who was a teenager, and my in-law by the name of Saran.
Sorry, forgive me. Forgive me, Mr. I have found the document, and I wonder if I can just put it to you, and if you can confirm this, please. It will save on time. Your uncle, Hut Tat, your son, Pin Sodat, your son, Narat Pin Narat, your son Pi Purin, your wife Pin Kiem Anyi, your father Lien Chao, your mother Lien Lorn, your younger brother Lien Teng, his wife Lab, and their children Visop and Map, your younger sister Lien Keng, her husband Sarun, and their daughter Srey Vochuk, your younger sister Lien Vuch, and your cousin Sim. Is that correct?
Response: Yes, it is. All of them either died or disappeared.
Thank you, Mr. Pignate. We did it in 26 minutes. Can I thank Mr. President and Your Honours for going beyond 12 o'clock? Thank you.
The President. Thank you, Mr. Punjathai, and thank you, the prosecution. It is now appropriate time for lunch adjournment. The chamber will adjourn until 1:30 p.m. Court officer is now directed to assist the Suo party during the adjournment and have him return to the courtroom by 1:30 p.m. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Kilsompon to his holding cell and have him return to the courtroom before 1:30 p.m. The court is adjourned.